Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books are sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
It appears on the sports calendar every 4 years, and it is one of the most anticipated couple of weeks of that year. Athletes come from all corners of the world, and they come from countries that are well known and from countries that most people cannot find on a map. Yet through the vehicle of sports, it is one true time where all of humankind have at least a shared interest in the same thing at the same time. This 4-year event is, of course, the Summer Olympics. This summer, athletes from all over the world will descend on Paris for the games of the 33rd Olympiad. In all, 206 nations and 329 events in 32 sports will compete to be on their best day, faster, higher, and stronger. Hello once again, I'm Dana Augusta, your host of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast, the sports history podcast you didn't know you needed, as we give you the best of sports from back in the day. In this edition of the podcast, we will be celebrating the start of the Summer Olympic Games in Paris, France. There for the third time since the first Olympics of the modern era was staged 128 years ago in Athens, Greece. This is the first of a two-part episode which we will highlight the best and the most memorable, and in some cases not so great, moments in Olympic history. This edition will be an American-centric episode, as we will highlight the 4 previous summer games that were held on American soil. The 1904 Summer Games in St. Louis, 1932 and 1984 Games in Los Angeles, and the 1996 Games in Atlanta. In the main event, it has been 40 years since the games of the 23rd Olympiad was in Los Angeles, and the first Summer Games that I watched as a kid, and became an instant fan of the games and what it means to the world as a whole, and not just in sports. We will take an in-depth look at those games and the athletes that made their mark on those games in Los Angeles. Later in the show, we will look at past games that were held here in the United States and the heroes that were synonymous with those games, and also take a look forward to the 2028 games that are scheduled to take place in Los Angeles as the games of the 34th Summer Olympiad. Now, in those games, the LA Coliseum will once again be the centerpiece of those games, becoming the first stadium to host the Olympic Games 3 different times. And we will shine a light on that stadium that has hosted not only the Olympics, but the Super Bowl and the World Series. And finally, to close out the show, we will send a shout out to one of the 2 Olympic moments that actually brought me to tears. It happened during the Games of Atlanta, and to say that it was simply the greatest would be an amazing understatement. It sounds like we have a good show in store for you guys, so in this all-new Olympic edition of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast, which is, just as a reminder, a member of the Sports History Network.
We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday's Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.
On Saturday, July 28th, 1984, I was doing what any 11-year-old kid would have been probably doing. Riding my mongoose bicycle somewhere, or at my friend's house playing basketball, or maybe even seeing who could get the high score on Pac-Man. Yet, my grandfather, the resident super sports fan in my family, was getting prepared for something that I knew very little about. I was aware of the Olympics, but I had never seen it. The Summer Olympic Games of 1984 was the first Olympics after the American boycott in 1980 because of the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. So the United States didn't compete, and I had no reference to that. A few months earlier, I was aware of the Winter Olympics there in Sarajevo, Yugoslavia, but I never really watched it because those sports I had little to no interest in. Plus, as I've said before here on this podcast, I'm from South Louisiana, and the only ice I knew of we put in our drinks. Now, my grandfather had asked if I wanted to watch the opening ceremonies with him, and since it was summer in Louisiana with temperatures in the upper 90s with about 95% humidity, going outside was something I didn't really want to do. So I sat and watched the opening ceremonies with my granddad, and I was immediately transfixed. The 1984 Summer Olympics, officially the games of the 23rd Olympiad and commonly known as LA 84, was held from July 28th to August 12th of 1984 in Los Angeles, and it marked the second time that LA had hosted the games, the first time being in 1932. California was the home state of then President Ronald Reagan, who officially opened the games during the ceremonies. As the United States had boycotted the games 4 years earlier in Moscow, the 1984 games were boycotted in return by 14 Eastern Bloc countries, including the Soviet Union and East Germany, in response to the American-led boycott of the 1980 Olympics in Moscow. However, Romania was the only Soviet bloc state that opted to attend the games. Albania, Iran, and Libya also chose to boycott the games for unrelated reasons. Now, despite the field being depleted in certain sports due to the boycott, a total of 140 national Olympic committees took part in the 84 games, a record number at the time, and the United States won the most gold medals and most overall medals, followed by Romania and West Germany. On May 18, 1978, the Olympic Committee, the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, awarded the city of LA to host the 1984 games. There were only two cities in the running, LA and Tehran. They both made bids to host the games in 84, but 1 year earlier, LA was awarded. The Iranian capital withdrew its bid as a result of Iran's political stance and turmoil during that time in the late 1970s. LA had actually made bids to host the games of 1976 and again in 1980, but they were awarded to Montreal and Moscow respectively. In retrospect, the 1984 Summer Olympics are widely considered to be the most financially successful modern Olympics, serving as an example on how to run an Olympic Games. One of the main reasons for this was the use of existing stadiums for different sports that are within the area of Southern California. The most notable stadium that was used was, of course, the LA Coliseum, the centerpiece of the 1932 Summer Games. More on that beautiful edifice later in the show. Next door to the Coliseum was the Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena, once the home of the Los Angeles Lakers and the new home of the recently relocated LA Clippers. The LA Sports Arena would be the site of Olympic boxing. Speaking of the Lakers, the basketball competition took place at the Forum in Inglewood. The Forum would also be the site of the team handball finals. Over at Chavez Ravine, Dodger Stadium would be used, of course, for Olympic baseball, despite it being a demonstration sport, and it would become an actual medal sport in the 1992 Barcelona Games. Meanwhile, the home arena of UCLA Bruins basketball, Pauley Pavilion, would be the site of Olympic gymnastics, while across town in the Westchester section of LA, the Albert Gersten Pavilion, the home of the Loyola Marymount Lions basketball team, was the site of the weightlifting competition. Then there were several events that took place in the famous venues outside of Metro LA. The famous Santa Anita racetrack was the site of Olympic equestrian, while the Anaheim Convention Center, the former home of the Anaheim Amigos and later the LA Stars of the American Basketball Association, hosted Olympic wrestling. Also, the Raleigh Reynolds Memorial Pool at Pepperdine University was the site of water polo. Now, for those of you who remember the ill-fated and terribly tacky Battle of the Network Stars television show, this was where the swimming competition took place. Then there was soccer, and the preliminaries were held outside of LA. Way outside. 3 venues that were used outside of what they call Los Angeles proper was Harvard Stadium. Yes, that Harvard Stadium in Boston. Another was the Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium at the U.S. Naval Academy in Maryland. And just a slightly bit closer, Stanford Stadium in Palo Alto, California, which shortly thereafter would be the site of Super Bowl 19. All of it culminated in the soccer final to be played at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. Now, France eventually won the Olympic Association football tournament, or the Olympic soccer tournament, defeating Brazil 2-0 in the final. Olympic football was unexpectedly played before massive crowds throughout America, including a 100,000 person attendance at the Rose Bowl for the final. This interest eventually led the U.S. to hosting the 1994 FIFA World Cup. The 1984 torch relay began in New York City and ended in Los Angeles, traversing 33 states and the District of Columbia. And unlike later torch relays, the torch was continuously carried by runners on foot. The route covered more than 9,320 miles and involved more than 3,000 runners that featured several celebrities and other notable people and athletes. As the sun began to set in Southern California on the day of the Olympic opening ceremonies, Gina Hemphill, the granddaughter of Jesse Owens, carried the torch into the Coliseum and completed 1 lap around the track. Then she handed it off to the final runner, Rayford Johnson, the winner of the decathlon at the 1960 Olympics, and with the torch he touched off the flame, which passed through a specially designed flammable Olympic logo, igniting all 5 rings. The flame then passed up the cauldron atop the famous peristyle and remained lit for the duration of the games. Johnson became the first person of African descent to light the cauldron in Olympic history. Now, as I watched this as an 11-year-old, I had become an instant convert to the Olympics, and I would never miss another Olympic opening ceremony, summer or winter. Now, with the absence of Eastern Bloc countries, the United States as a whole dominated the medal count with 83 gold medals. And it marked the first time since the 1968 Games in Mexico City that they led all countries in medals. And the most popular events in the Olympics, of course, is track and field. And in these Olympics, the American contingent did not disappoint. The Americans won gold in the 40 medals, including 16 gold in the men's and women's track and field events. Yet 2 American athletes stole the show in Los Angeles on the track. First was sprinter Carl Lewis, making his first of 4 appearances in the Summer Olympic Games, and it was one hell of a debut. Lewis won 4 gold medals, equaling the performance of Jesse Owens in the 1936 Summer Games in Berlin, winning gold in the 100 meters, 200 meters, 4x100 meter relay, and the long jump. And he anchored the relay team that featured Sam Grady, who would go on to play for the Denver Broncos and then the Los Angeles Raiders in the NFL. Also on the relay team was Ron Brown, who currently was a member of the Los Angeles Rams, along with another American runner, Calvin Smith. The second American male track star in these Olympics was Edwin Moses, who won gold in the 400-meter hurdles, his first gold medal since winning that same event 8 years earlier in Montreal in the 1976 Olympics. The win in the Olympics also kept alive one of the greatest winning streaks in sports history. Beginning in 1977, Moses never lost a race in the 400-meter hurdles, and that streak would continue until 1987, totaling 122 consecutive wins. In the 110-meter hurdles, Roger Kingdom won gold in that event in the triple jump, and also in the triple jump, Al Joyner won gold while the silver went to Mike Connolly. Now, if that name does sound familiar, Mike Connolly, well, it should. Mike Conley is the father of Mike Conley Jr., the current point guard for the Minnesota Timberwolves basketball team. The United States women continued the American winning ways on the track as well. Evelyn Ashford clocked in a time of 10.97 in the women's 100 meters for an Olympic record, while Valerie Briscoe-Hooks took home gold in the 200 and 400 meters respectively. Benita Fitzgerald won gold in the 10-meter hurdles, and the Americans also won gold in the 4x100 meter relay and the 4x400 meter relay. Yet anytime you have an Olympic track, there will be some sort of controversy, and in these Olympic Games, it was in the women's 3,000 meters. The favorite in that race and current world champion was American Mary Decker, and her main rival was South American Zola Budd. Now, sometime during the race, Decker and Budd collided, and Decker fell to the running track, injuring her leg. That opened the door for Romanian Maricisa Prica, who won gold, outpacing Wendy Sly of Great Britain. Other notable performances of non-American athletes included Joaquim Cruz of Brazil, winning the 800 meters with a time of 1 minute and 43 seconds, setting an new Olympic record. Nawal Al-Rawbatago of Morocco became the first female Olympic champion of a Muslim nation, and the first of her country in the 400-meter hurdles. Carlos Lopez from Portugal won the marathon at the age of 37, with a time of 2 hours and 9 minutes and 21 seconds, an Olympic record that stood for 24 years. It was also the first gold medal ever for Portugal. Gold medal favorite, world record holder, and then world champion Robert de Castella from Australia finished in 5th, 1 minute and 48 seconds behind Lopez. A women's marathon was also held for the first time at the Olympics, won by Joan Benoit of the United States. The event is also remembered for Swiss runner Gabriela Anderson-Scheiss, who, suffering from heat exhaustion, entered the stadium for the final lap in a state of almost total exhaustion, barely able to walk but eventually completing the race, collapsing at the finish line and being immediately treated by medical personnel. There was also Daley Thompson of Great Britain, who apparently missed a new world record in winning his second consecutive gold medal in the decathlon. However, the very next year, his score was retroactively raised to 88.47, giving him the new world record. Sebastian Coe of Great Britain became the first man to win consecutive gold medals in the 1500 meters. Meanwhile, in other sports, the first gold medals to be awarded at the LA Olympics was also the first medal ever awarded to an athlete from China, when Zhu Haifeng won the 50-meter pistol event. Synchronized swimming and rhythmic gymnastics also debuted in Los Angeles as Olympic events, as did windsurfing. Olympic tennis and baseball were demonstration sports during these Olympics. Li Ning of the People's Republic of China won 6 medals in gymnastics, 3 gold, 2 silver, and 1 bronze, earning him the nickname the Prince of Gymnasts in China. Li would later light the Olympic cauldron at the 2008 Olympics in Beijing. Steve Redgrave of Great Britain won his first title in rowing for the record 5 he would go on to win in Olympic competitions. Victor Davis of Canada set a new world record, winning the gold medal in the 200-meter breaststroke in swimming. And then there was America's sweetheart, Mary Lou Retton. Now, if there was one American athlete that captured the public's imagination at these Olympics during this time, it was this little-known 16-year-old gymnast from West Virginia. In the LA Olympics, she became the first gymnast outside of Eastern Europe to win the gymnastics all-around competition. Adding to that, she received the silver medal for the team all-around in the vault, and also gained bronze in the uneven bars and the floor exercise. Also notable in the women's gymnastics was Julianne McNamara, sharing gold with China's Mei Wan Hong. Yet it might have been Mary Lou's Olympics, but the Romanian team led by Katerina Szabo was the real stars of the competition at Pauli Pavilion. Szabo won gold in the floor exercise, the vault, and the team all around, while sharing gold with teammates Simona Polka. It was a great turnout for the men as well. The American team won gold in the team all around. Golds were awarded to Peter Vidmore on the pommel horse, while Timothy Daggett finished with the bronze in that event, while Bart Connor won gold on the rings. At the Forum in Inglewood, USA Basketball continued their dominance on the hardwood. Future Dream Team members Michael Jordan, Patrick Ewing, and Chris Mullin were on the team that won gold in basketball, coached by legendary Indiana Hoosiers coach Bobby Knight. The team was made up of collegiate stars since the NBA players were not permitted to play in the Olympics at this time. The other notable players on Team USA included Steve Alford of Indiana, Vern Fleming of Georgia, Joe Klein and Alvin Robertson of Arkansas. You also had John Koncak of SMU, you had Sam Perkins of North Carolina, Wayman Tisdale of Oklahoma, Jeff Turner of Vanderbilt, and Leon Wood from nearby Cal State Fullerton. There was also notable snubs on this pre-Dream Team basketball team, including none other than Charles Barkley, who many observers felt that Barkley and Knight's strong personalities would not mesh. Oh, you think? Other notable cuts from the team included John Stockton of Gonzaga, who would become the NBA's all-time assists and steals leader. Another one that missed out was Terry Porter of Wisconsin Stevens Point, who would lead the Portland Trail Blazers to 2 NBA Finals appearances in 3 years in the late 80s and early 90s. And you also had Barkley's teammate at Auburn, Chuck Person, who would be an all-star with the Indiana Pacers later in the decade. Another notable performance was that of Connie Carpenter Finney of the United States, when she became the first woman to win an Olympic cycling event when she won the women's individual road race. In the pool, the United States won 21 medals out of their haul of 34 total medals in various swimming events and in diving. American Greg Louganis won gold in the 3-meter springboard and 10-meter platform diving competition. On August 12th, the Olympics would come to a rousing end. In the previous Olympic Games, only 6 members from each country's delegation would be allowed to attend the closing ceremony. In these Olympic Games, however, tradition was broken, as all athletes would take part. As a result, more than 6,000 athletes marched in as one group as the familiar Olympic fanfare and theme by incomparable John Williams was performed below the famous Coliseum peristyle. During the ceremony, the Olympic flag was handed over from the mayor of Los Angeles, Tom Bradley, to the mayor of Seoul, South Korea, Yoon Bo-hyun, who would go on to host the Olympics in 1988. So, 40 years ago, the world converged on the city of LA for the games of the 23rd Olympiad, and for one 11-year-old kid in South Louisiana became a lifelong fan of the games. So we salute the great and successful games of LA 84. The 1984 Summer Games were one of the most successful games to take place, and it took place here in the United States, but it was not the only one. The city of LA hosted it for the second time during that summer of 1984, some 52 years after hosting it for the first time in 1932, and some 80 years after the city of St. Louis hosted the third Olympiad in conjunction with the 1904 World's Fair. Then, in 1996, the city of Atlanta would become the third different American city to host the Summer Olympic Games. Athletes from all around the world would converge on Atlanta for the 96th Centennial Olympic Games. More on these games coming up after the break. You're listening to our 2-part Olympic special here on the Historically Speaking Sports podcast here on the Sports History Network.
We here at the Sports History Network are thrilled to work with our sponsors and partners. With their support, we are able to produce great content for you. The other cool thing is, most of our sponsors and partners offer discounts to pass along to our fans. So if you go to the website today, you'll find Row 1, Royal Retros, Play Classic, Thrive Fantasy, and Mega Seats. With Row 1, you can save up to 15% in the gallery with the code SHN. The Row 1 gallery includes over 5,200 reproduced sports history prints on a variety of sizes, including wood, metal, canvas, acrylic, or poster paper. The Row 1 shop has thousands more unique items with retro and historical designs dating back to 1876. Including t-shirts, long-sleeve shirts, phone cases, mugs, blankets, pillows, towels, as well as shower curtains. Royal Retros is the king of throwbacks. They've got jerseys, shirts, hats, collectibles, and more from the defunct leagues and the teams in those leagues. Play Classic has your sports simulation board games. Just use the code SHN to save 10% off your first order. Thrive Fantasy is a daily fantasy sports and esports app for player props. Use the promo code SHN for instant 100% match up to $100. And Mega Seats are tickets with no fees. You can save up to 10% with the code SHN. So there you have it. When you check out the sponsors and deals tabs on the Sports History Network website, you'll find plenty of deals to save you some dough. Check it out today.
Welcome back to our two-part Olympic special here on the Historically Speaking Sports podcast. This is part one of the two-part special where we are highlighting all of the Olympic Games that took place here in the United States. So at this juncture, I would like to preview what we have in store for part two. Paris, the city of light, the city of the Eiffel Tower, and this summer, the city of Olympic heroes. This will be the third time that the Summer Olympic Games will take place in Paris. The two other times Paris was the host was in 1900 and in 1924, marking the 100th anniversary of those games. We will travel back to those games for the second and eighth Summer Olympic Games of the modern era to talk about the heroes and sports that was featured in those games. Also in this episode, we will discuss Olympic controversies, including the Ben Johnson doping scandal in 1988, the 1972 Olympic basketball debacle, the raised fists of Tommy Smith and John Carlos in the Mexico City Olympics, and the terrorist attack in both the Munich Games of 1972 and the Atlanta Games of 1996. Finally, we'll send a shout out to the second of the two instances when what transpired at the game stirred my emotions to the point of tears. The first will be discussed later in this episode, while the second happened in Barcelona in 1992 and British runner Derek Redmond. So be on the lookout for that episode coming right after this one, wherever you get your podcasts. So now, back to the show. Beginning in 1896, a new multi-sport event, maybe it could be called a sports festival, was celebrated in Athens, Greece, and would take place every 4 years in a different major city, which was created to promote international understanding through Olympic competition. And with the beginning of those games in Athens and continuing today through 33 iterations of what was called the Games of the Olympiad, it has become one of the most anticipated sporting events on the sports calendar. Now, throughout its history, the games have appeared on every continent except Antarctica and Africa, and each one of the 32 previous have been memorable in its own right. The Summer Olympics have been celebrated here in the United States 4 times previously, including the 1984 games that we just finished talking about. The first time the Olympics were here in the United States, you have to go all the way back to 1904, where the Olympic Games were celebrated along with something called the World's Fair. The 1904 Summer Olympics, which was officially known as the Games of the Third Olympiad, took place in St. Louis between the dates of July 1st and November 23rd of that year. Yes, the Olympics actually took place for 4 months. It wasn't the 2-week whirlwind of events that we know of today. These games lasted, if you could believe, from the week of the 4th of July all the way to the week of Thanksgiving. Talk about stretching it out. Now, most of the events were conducted at a place now known as Francis Field on the campus of Washington University in St. Louis. It marked the first time the Olympic Games would take place outside of the continent of Europe. Even though the Olympic Games were taking place in the middle in the Midwest of the United States, it was still very difficult to get to St. Louis, even in 1904, some 100 years after the Korup discovery with Lewis and Clark. Tensions caused by the Russo-Japanese War and difficulties in traveling to St. Louis resulted in very few top-class athletes from outside the United States and Canada taking part in the games. Roughly 70 to 75 athletes of the total 651 who competed came from outside of North America, and only between 12 to 15 nations were represented in all. There's one bit of trivia about the 1904 games, and did you know that this was the current 3-medal format, gold, medal, silver, and bronze for first, second, and third place was actually introduced here at the 1904 Olympics. The games initially were not scheduled to be held in St. Louis. The city of Chicago initially won the bid to host the 1904 Summer Olympics, but organizers of the Louisiana Purchase Exposition in St. Louis, also known as the World's Fair, would not accept another international event in the same time frame. The exposition organization began to plan for its own sports activities, therefore informing the Chicago Olympic Organizing Committee that its own international sports events were intended to eclipse the Olympic Games unless they were moved to St. Louis. Pierre de Coubertin, the founder of the modern Olympic movement, then intervened and awarded the Games to St. Louis. Now, when the Games began, new sports such as boxing, dumbbells, catch wrestling, which later became freestyle wrestling, and the decathlon made their debuts. All of the swimming events were held in a temporary pond near Sinker and Wyndham Boulevards, where quote-unquote life-saving demonstrations of unsinkable lifeboats for ocean liners also took place. One of the most remarkable athletes was American gymnast George Iser, who won 6 medals even though his left leg was made of wood. And Frank Kugler won 4 medals in freestyle wrestling, weightlifting, and tug-of-war, making him the only competitor to win a medal in 3 different sports at the same Olympic Games. Over at the Olympic track, Chicago runner James Lightbody, who won the steeplechase and the 800 meters, then set a natural world record in the 1500 meters. Harry Hillman also won the 200 meters and the 400 meter hurdles, and he also won the flat 400 meters. Sprinter Archie Hahn was the champion of the 60 meters, 100 meters, and 200 meter sprints. In his last race, Hahn set an Olympic record with 21.6 seconds in the 200 meters, a natural record that stood actually for 28 years. In the discus, after American Martin Sheridan had thrown exactly the same distance as his competitor, Ralph Rose, with a distance of 39.28 meters, the judges gave them both an extra throw to decide the winner. In this sudden death showdown, Sheridan won the decider and claimed the gold medal. The team representing Great Britain was awarded a grand total of 2 medals, and both won by Irish athletes. The top non-US athlete was Emil Rausch of Germany, who won 3 swimming events. Zoltán Halmé of Hungary and Charles Daniels from the United States each won 2 swimming gold medals. Galt Football Club from Canada won the gold medal in soccer. And as mentioned before, boxing made its debut at the St. Louis Games. The sport has since been featured at every Summer Olympics except for the Games of 1912 in Stockholm. While wrestling made a return, it was exclusively the newly debuted catch wrestling, which later became freestyle wrestling, as opposed to the traditional Greco-Roman style of the 1896 Summer Olympics. 5 nations were represented in the event, each of which of the 42 competitors having resided here in the United States. Now, later editions would have both styles of wrestling in their programs. Basketball, hurling, American football, and Gaelic football were featured as unofficial sports. There were demonstration sports. It was actually a demonstration bout of women's boxing. Baseball is also noted by the World Baseball Softball Confederation to have appeared at the 1904 Games, though it does not appear in the list compiled by Olympic historian Bill Mallon, and actual game results are not known. Now, 5 sports venues were used for the 1904 Summer Olympics. The Glen Echo Country Club, the first golf course constructed west of the Mississippi River, which opened in 1901, was the venue for golf and tennis. 3 Olympic sports were hosted at Forest Park, the site of the Louisiana Purchase Exposition, which was being held concurrently with the Olympics. The quote-unquote life-saving exposition at the lake at Forest Park was also used for diving, swimming, and water polo events. And of course, Francis Olympic Field and Gymnasium, which are still in use at Washington University today in St. Louis. An ornamental gate commemorating the 1904 games was constructed outside the stadium immediately after the exposition. A swimming pool was added to the gymnasium in 1985. Forest Park, constructed in 1876, is still in use and attracts over 12 million visitors annually. And the Glen Echo Country Club remains in use as a golf course today. As would be expected, the United States led the medal count with 231 medals out of the possible 280, including 76 gold medals. "28 years later, the Summer Olympics will return to the United States, but this time, and for the first time, in the city of Los Angeles. The Games of the 10th Olympiad opened on July 30th, 1932 at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum for the first time. Only 37 countries were represented due to it being the height of the Depression compared to the 46 countries that competed in the previous Olympic Games that were held in Amsterdam in 1928. Even President Herbert Hoover didn't attend the opening ceremony, and the organizing committee didn't report all of the financial details of the games, yet newspapers at the time did report that the Olympics in 1932 did make a profit of $1 million, which in today's money is equivalent to $18.2 million. In Hoover's absence, the games will be opened by his vice president, Charles Curtis, the first vice president to open an Olympic Games. There were a couple of firsts that took place during these Olympics. An Olympic Village was built for the first time and became a model for future games, which was located in Baldwin Hills, which was occupied by all of the male athletes. Meanwhile, the female athletes were housed at the Chapman Park Hotel on Wilshire Boulevard. This will also be the first Olympics to feature a victory podium for awarding of the medals at the conclusion of all competitions. The LA Memorial Coliseum, the centerpiece of the competition, was known in 1932 as Olympic Stadium. Highlighting the competition was Babe Dietrichson. She won 2 gold medals in the javelin and the hurdles, and she also competed in a jump off for the gold medal in the high jump. Her technique, however, in the jump off was ruled illegal, leaving Dietrichson with a second place finish in the high jump. The field hockey event was interesting, perhaps in a funny way. Only 3 nations took part: the United States, Japan, and India. The United States actually lost both matches, losing to India 24-1 and 9-2 to Japan. But even after being outplayed in those 2 games, the U.S. still took home the bronze. Another weird moment took place in the steeplechase event. Due to an official's error, the 3,000 meter steeplechase actually went for 3,460 meters, or 1 extra lap, and no one noticed until after the race was over. Also, in men's track and field, Eddie Tolan won both the 100 meters and the 200 meters. Romeo Neary won 3 gold medals in gymnastics. Helene Madison won 3 gold medals in swimming, while the Japanese upset the men's events and took all but 1 title. Takeshi Nishi was the gold medalist along with his horse Uranus in the equestrian show jumping individual event. Nishi's gold medal is Japan's only gold medal in the equestrian event to this very day. Nishi died in 1945 as an officer stationed in the defense of the island of Iwo Jima during World War II. Then there's Kitsu Kitamura, who won the gold medal in the men's 1500 meter freestyle swimming race. He was and continues to be the youngest ever male swimmer to win gold medal at an Olympic Games, winning the event at the tender age of 14. Then there was Australia's Dunk Gray, winning the first cycling gold medal and setting a world record of 1 minute and 13 seconds in the 1,000 meter time trial. The Dunk Gray velodrome built for the 2000 Sydney Olympic Games was named after him. One of the more popular events of the Olympics has always been women's team gymnastics, which debuted in the previous Olympics in Amsterdam. Yet, the event was not held in these games. There were women gymnasts who actually traveled to Los Angeles and participated in the exhibition events at the 1932 Games. On the women's side, several women's events debuted at these games, among them the 80-meter hurdles and the javelin throw. A total of 15 sports venues were used for the 1932 Summer Olympics. In order to control costs in the wake of the Great Depression, existing venues were used. They included 2 golf courses, 2 city parks, 3 public highways, and a city road. The swimming stadium, now known as the John C. Argue Swim Stadium, was the only new venue constructed for these games. The Rose Bowl, constructed in 1921, was made into a temporary velodrome for track cycling events under the auspices of Union Cyclistes Internationale. The LA Coliseum, constructed in 1923, was used as the Olympic Stadium. The Olympic Auditorium was constructed in 1924 in preparation for Los Angeles being awarded the Games. It was therefore modified to meet the specifications for boxing, weightlifting, and wrestling federations. Long Beach Marine Stadium was created in 1925 when Alamos Bay was dredged and then further dredged 7 years later in time for the 32 Games. The famous Riviera Country Club opened in 1926 as the Los Angeles Athletic Club golf course and was then renamed Riviera by the time of the 32 Games. In addition to hosting Olympic golf that year, it was also the site of the 1948 U.S. Open, the 1983 and 1995 PGA Championship. A total of 299 medals were contested in these games, with the United States leading the medal count with 110 total medals, including 44 gold. The next closest was Italy, with 36 medals and 12 of them gold. Just 12 years after the triumphs of the Los Angeles Olympics in 1984, the eyes of the world were once again on an American city. This time Atlanta in the summer of 1996. Now, these Olympics in the grand scheme of things was somewhat of an upset. Many officials at the International Olympic Committee really made a push to have those Olympics back in Athens, where it all started 100 years earlier. It was the 100th anniversary of the start of the modern Olympiad in 1996, but it marked the 4th time that an American city hosted the Summer Olympics. Now, these Olympics, officially the Games of the 26th Olympiad, was also notable because these were the first Summer Olympics to be held in a different year than the Winter Olympics, since those Olympics began in 1924. Also, this was the first of 2 consecutive Olympic Games to be hosted in predominantly English-speaking countries. The next Olympic Games in 2000 will be held in Sydney, Australia, and this will be the last Summer Olympic Games to take place on American soil until it will take place again in 2028, where it returned to Los Angeles for the 3rd time. In all, 10,320 athletes from a total of 197 countries competed in 26 sports, which included Olympic debuts of beach volleyball, mountain biking, and women's softball. In addition, 24 countries made their Summer Olympic debuts in Atlanta, which included 11 former Soviet republics participating for the first time as independent nations. The United States, as expected with the Olympics on American soil, led all nations with a total of 101 medals, leading all nations for the first time since the 1984 Summer Olympics and the first non-boycotted Olympics since the 1968 Mexico City Games. Now, breaking down the medal count, the United States won more gold medals, 44, and more silver medals, 32, than all other participating countries. Outside of the great individual performances of the Games of Atlanta, it will also be remembered for what happened on the night of July 27th of 1996. In Centennial Olympic Park, an area of downtown Atlanta which had been built to serve as a public focal point for activities, a pipe bomb was detonated, killing 2 and injuring 11. Several years later, Eric Rudolph confessed to the bombing as well as a series of terroristic attacks and was sentenced to life in prison. Nevertheless, the Games of Atlanta was a financial success for the city, turning a profit mostly because of lucrative sponsorships, broadcast rights, and the Games' reliance on public funding. In women's gymnastics, Ukrainian Lilia Pakopayeva became the all-around Olympic champion. She also won a second gold medal for the floor exercise final and a silver on the beam, becoming the only female gymnast since Nadia Comaneci to win individual gold after winning the all-around title in the same Olympics. The most notable moment in the gymnastics was the performance of Carrie Strug. Suffering from a severely injured ankle, Strug scored a perfect score on the vault, landing on one foot. The score was good enough to give the U.S. women's team the gold medal. Meanwhile, U.S. Shannon Miller won the gold medal on the balance beam event, the first time an Olympic gymnast had won an individual gold in a non-boycotted Olympic Games. In the pool, Amy Van Dyken won 4 gold medals, becoming the first American woman to win 4 titles in a single Olympiad. Penny Himes, the swimmer from South Africa, won gold medals in both the 100 meters and 200 meter breaststroke events, while Michelle Smith of Ireland won 3 gold medals and a bronze in swimming. She remains her nation's most decorated Olympian. However, her victories were overshadowed by doping allegations, and even though she did not test positive in 1996, she received a 4-year suspension in 1998 for tampering with a urine sample, though her medals and records were allowed to stand. In track and field, Donovan Bailey of Canada won the men's 100 meters, setting a new world record of 9.84 seconds at the time. He also anchored the team's gold medal in the 4x100 meter relay. The track and field hero from 1992 in Barcelona, Michael Johnson, won gold in both the 200 meters and 400 meters, setting a world record of 19.32 seconds in the 200 meters. Marie-Jose Perec equaled Johnson's performance, although without a world record, by winning the rare 200-400 meter double. Carl Lewis won his 4th long jump gold medal at the age of 35. In tennis, Andre Agassi won the gold medal, which would eventually make him the first man and second singles players overall after his eventual wife Steffi Graf to win the career Golden Slam, which consists of an Olympic gold medal and victories in the singles tournaments to be held at the professional tennis's 4 major events: the Australian Open, French Open, Wimbledon, and the US Open. There was a series of national firsts realized at the Games of Atlanta. Dion Hemmings became the first woman to win an Olympic gold medal for Jamaica and the English-speaking West Indies. Lee Lei Shan won gold medal in sailing, the only Olympic medal that Hong Kong has ever won as a British colony. This meant that for the only time, the colonial flag of Hong Kong was raised to the accompaniment of the British national anthem, God Save the Queen, as Hong Kong's sovereignty was later transferred to China in 1997. The U.S. women's soccer team won gold medal for the first ever women's football event, and for the first time, Olympic medals were won by athletes from Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Burundi, Ecuador, Georgia, Hong Kong, Kazakhstan, Moldova, Mozambique, Slovakia, Tonga, Ukraine, and Uzbekistan. Another first in Atlanta was the first Summer Olympics ever that not a single nation swept all 3 medals in a single event. So as we get closer to the Olympic Games set to open within a couple of weeks, the Paris Games have a lot to live up to, as well as the Games of Los Angeles in the summer of 2028. In the 4 instances that the Games were here in the United States, athletes and fans made those games special and placed the United States on top as the potential sites for future Olympic Games, and they have served as an example of what a successful Games could look like. Its physical address is 3911 South Figueroa Street, but it is the site of a building that in the minds of sports fans here in the United States, it is like a secular Vatican. Located at that address is the historic Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. It is the only stadium on the planet that has hosted the World Series, the Super Bowl, and the Olympics. Conceived as a hallmark of civic pride, the Coliseum was commissioned in 1921 as a memorial to Los Angeles veterans of World War I. Completed in 1923, it will become the first stadium to have hosted the Summer Olympics 3 times when it hosted 2028 Summer Olympics, previously hosting the 1932 and 1984 games. It was designated a National Historic Landmark on July 27, 1984, one day before the opening ceremony of the 1984 Summer Olympics. The groundbreaking ceremony took place on December 21, 1921, with construction being completed in just over 16 months. On May 21, 1923, less than a month after the opening of Yankee Stadium in the Bronx. Designed by John and Donald Parkinson, the original Bowl's initial construction costs were $954,000. And when the Coliseum opened in 1923, it was the largest stadium in Los Angeles with a capacity of 75,144. In 1930, however, with the Olympics due in 2 years, the stadium was extended upward to 79 rows of seats, with 2 tiers of tunnels, expanding the seating capacity to 101,000. The physical nature of the bowl-shaped configuration for the Coliseum was undoubtedly inspired by the earlier Yale Bowl, which was built in 1914. The now signature Olympic torch was added, and the stadium was briefly known as Olympic Stadium. The Olympic cauldron torch, which burned through both the games, remains above the signature peristyle at the east end of the stadium as a reminder of this, and as do the Olympic ring symbols over one of the main entrances. Originally for the 1984 games, burnable Olympic rings and a 25-step hydraulic staircase was added inside in the front of the Coliseum to allow the cauldron to be lit by lifting up the stairs to the burnable Olympic rings, which brought the flame to the cauldron on top. The LA Coliseum remains the only stadium to host the Super Bowl, Super Bowls 1 and Super Bowl 7, the World Series in 1959 between the Dodgers and the White Sox, and not 1 but 2 Olympic Games. It will once again be the centerpiece of the Olympic Games in 4 years. It has been the longtime home of the USC Trojans football team, as well as the home of the UCLA Bruins football team before the team started playing its home games in the Rose Bowl in 1982. It was also the home of the Los Angeles Rams, from their arrival in Southern California in the late 1940s to the 1980 NFL season when they moved to Anaheim. And then when they moved back to Los Angeles a few years ago, it was their temporary home before moving into SoFi Stadium. Meanwhile, the Raiders made the Coliseum home for a little over a decade in the mid-1980s to the mid-90s before moving back to Oakland. The LA Coliseum was one of the most famous and one of the true landmark stadiums not only in this country but in the world, and in 4 years would add to its illustrious history. Coming up here on the Historically Speaking Sports podcast, we will stay with the 1996 Centennial Olympic Games in Atlanta for this edition's shout-out segment. One of the events I truly look forward to in the Olympics is the Games opening ceremonies, and the one in Atlanta really stood out. It had the usual parade of nations, the raising of the Olympic flag, and other notable attractions that introduced the city of Atlanta, or more specifically the South, to the world on the biggest stage possible. But by far the most memorable moment of that incredible opening ceremony was the lighting of the Olympic cauldron. The moment so incredible and so moving, it literally brought me to tears. The story of my reaction to the lighting of the flame and why to me it was simply the greatest. That story coming up on this edition of the Historically Speaking Sports podcast, a member of the Sports History Network.
At the Sports History Network, we're all about the sports yesteryear, and so we're pleased to introduce you to Row 1, an online memorabilia gallery and shop that brings sports history to life. The Row 1 gallery features over 5,200 gorgeously reproduced prints of team posters, game program covers, game tickets, and advertisements in baseball, pro and college football, pro and college basketball, and more. Any gallery item may be printed in a variety of sizes on wood, metal, canvas, acrylic, or poster paper. It's your choice. In the Row 1 shop, you can pick from thousands of unique items that feature retro and historical backgrounds dating back to 1876. We have everything from clothing to phone cases to mugs, even shower curtains. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 for access to the full Row 1 catalog. When you buy from the gallery today, you can instantly save 15% on your purchase. All you have to do is enter the code SHN15 and your discount will be applied. That's SHN15. That's it. Simple. Save 15% off all your prints in the Row 1 gallery. Just go to sportshistorynetwork.com/row1. And don't forget to check out all the podcasts on the Sports History Network. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.
You are locked into the Historically Speaking Sports podcast, a member of the Sports History Network. And it's just a reminder out there, you could follow us on Twitter or X or Twitter X, whichever you want to call it. You can follow us at HistoricallySP2, and you could also write the show with possible show ideas, or if you just want to say hello, you could write to us at historically.speaking.sports@gmail.com. That email address, once again, historically.speaking.sports@gmail.com. On the night of July 19th, 1996, the world converged on Centennial Olympic Stadium in Atlanta for the opening ceremony of the 1996 Summer Olympic Games, the games of the 26th Olympiad. A total of slightly more than 10,000 athletes from 197 countries were on the infield of the new stadium in Atlanta, which would become, at the conclusion of the games, the new home of the Atlanta Braves baseball team, renamed Turner Field. At the time, I was a 23-year-old college student living in my small one-bedroom apartment just across the street from the campus of Southern University in Baton Rouge. I remember rushing home right after work that night after doing the drive time shift from the small radio station I worked at the time. And I had looked forward to the Olympics, with this one being the first in America since 1984, the first Summer Olympics I actually watched as an 11-year-old. Now, during the games of LA '84, I became an instant convert to the Olympic Games, not only with its athletic drama and performances, but also its history. And I had made it back in time with about maybe 30 minutes to spare, with enough time for me to fix a quick bite to eat and settle in to watch the opening ceremonies. And one of the coolest things that I remember from that Olympic opening ceremony was what led up to the game's opening was the countdown. The ceremony began with a 60-second countdown, which included footage from all of the previous Olympic Games, which began at the 22-second mark. At the conclusion of the countdown, there was a flashback to then IOC President Juan Antonio Samaranch doing the closing ceremonies at the previous Olympics in Barcelona, inviting the youth of the world to reconvene 4 years later in the city of Atlanta for the 26th Summer Olympic Games. I recall thinking to myself, was it too early for me to be getting goosebumps? Well, as the night progressed, I would realize that I hadn't seen anything yet. This was the 100th year anniversary of the first modern Olympics, and the city of Atlanta actually beat out Athens, that hosted the very first Olympic Games in 1896. Now, during the opening ceremonies, the organizers, I felt, did a great job of combining the history of the Olympic Games from its birth in 776 BC to the culture of the southern portion of the United States. One part of the program was called Welcome to the World, which featured cheerleaders, marching bands, and steppers representing a sports culture in the South typical of a college football Saturday afternoon. It also featured chrome-plated Chevrolet pickup trucks as a nod to the tailgating tradition in the South, and concluded with the wave. Now, I felt that it was just a little bit over the top, yet still it was kind of cool. Later, there was the song Georgia on My Mind, performed by Gladys Knight, a representation of the Civil War that destroyed the city of Atlanta, and poetry recited by the great James Earl Jones. Now, I did say that there was some ancient Olympic history that was represented in the program. Right before the Parade of Nations, there was a Temple of Zeus that was constructed in the center of the stadium, and using dancers and a very powerful arc light in the center and a large screen reaching approximately 50 feet high, the performers struck poses of the classic events of the ancient Olympics: archery, discus, wrestling, and running. Finally, the Greek goddess of victory appears to honor the champions. Time for my second experience of goosebumps. Then, almost on cue, the Parade of Nations begins with, of course, Greece, the birthplace of the ancient and modern games 100 years earlier. Greece began to possession, and as tradition and protocol dictates, it was followed by all of the nations in alphabetical order. Last, of course, was the host nation of the United States, led by team flag bearer Bruce Baumgartner, a freestyle wrestler, a two-time Olympic gold medalist who would go on to win bronze in these Olympics in 1996. Now all that was left was the lighting of the Olympic cauldron. Periodically, during the broadcast of the opening ceremony, they would cut away to give updates of the location of the Olympic flame. There were several rumors on who would light the cauldron, everyone from Mary Lou Retton to possibly Bruce Jenner or maybe even Michael Jordan. And as the torch approached the stadium, Al Order, the Olympic legend in the discus, carried the torch to the entrance of the stadium, handing it off to Atlanta native and current heavyweight champion Evander Holyfield. From there, he ran through a labyrinth of tunnels underneath the stadium and emerged in the center field on the stage to a thunderous ovation. From there, he ran to the track where he was joined by Greek athlete Voula Polidou. They both ran around the track together, representing the relationship between the first and current Olympic Games, and after running a lap together, they passed it to former American swimmer Janet Evans. At this point, I could barely contain my excitement as the cauldron was about to be lit. Now, in complete and total disclosure, I have to admit that I was thinking, Janet Evans, though she's a great female swimmer and an Olympic legend in her own right, was this the best person that you could get to light the flame? Really? She carried it around the track and then up this long ramp leading to the cauldron. Then as she approached the top of the ramp, a figure appeared from the darkness. As he stepped forward, it was none other than Muhammad Ali. My reaction to seeing Muhammad Ali appear at the top of the ramp with the torch in hand evoked emotion I was not expecting. Cheers mixed with heartfelt respect to the former world heavyweight champion. At this point, Ali was lighting the Olympic flame. Tears were flowing from my eyes as I sat in my appointment as a 23-year-old in Baton Rouge. To me, even to this day, it's still one of the greatest moments in sport I had ever witnessed. I was simply overwhelmed. The Atlanta Olympics were spectacular in a lot of ways, but when Ali lit the torch to signify the start of the Olympic Games in Atlanta, it truly was the greatest. And sports fans, that will do it for this edition of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast. Thank you for taking time out of your day to give us a listen. As usual, this podcast comes to you from the Bill King Memorial Studio in the sports wing of TM4 Enterprises, located in suburban Atlanta in the shadow of Stone Mountain. To get more content of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast, you can check us out on Twitter or Twitter X at historicallysp2, or you could send us a line at historically.speaking.sports@gmail.com. And if you have not done so already, please subscribe to the show. It really helps out a brother. Tell your family, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, hell, tell a passerby on the street about us if you think they like sports history. And until the next episode, which will be part 2 of our Olympic special double episode, please stay blessed, stay cool, and be your best in everything that you do. It will make the world a much, much better place. Peace.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.